part of Double P Media, doublepmedia.com.
Spoiler alert, this podcast is covering the most recently released episodes of The Crown on Netflix. If you haven't seen them yet, this podcast may spoil you. You've been warned. Welcome to podcast Lilibet, where today we are covering Season 6, Episode 5, Will's Mania, and Season 6, Episode 6, Ruritania. We'll get to the credits of who did what on those episodes in a minute, but first, my name is Matt Murdock. I am your jester host, and I do have a constitutionally required co-host as well, and I would rebuff him 3 times with the staff. However, he is someone who has truly mastered the Dutch bonnet napkin fold, and so I can't really refute him. Welcome to the podcast, once again, Bubba.
Matt, we're into it. This is the end of a great series, the final 6 episodes. It's exciting. We're going to break them down. Where is it going to end? There's spoilers online, but there won't be any in these podcasts because I've only seen the first 2 episodes, 5 and 6 of part 2. Very excited to talk about the monarchy.
I also have not quite completed the series yet. I did go a little bit past, a couple episodes past, but I haven't seen the last 2. And here's something that's interesting, Bubba, is across the internet, as I've kind of looked across some of those spoilery kind of posts, I found that there's a kind of a mixed reaction to the end of this series.
Oh, yeah. It's mixed. It is mixed. I see that online, too.
Yeah. And preferably with these 2 particular episodes that we're going to be covering tonight, I've seen less enthusiasm, but more enthusiasm towards the very ending. On the other hand, those that have the opposite opinions of those are on the very extreme, and they seem to be going back and forth from the opposite direction. So it'll be interesting to see where we come down on these episodes. So why don't we start rating them now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's start with Season 6, Will's Mania. This one was written by Peter Morgan and Jonathan Wilson and directed by el-Toukhy. Probably butchered that name. So sorry if I did. Your synopsis is: hounded by press and adoring girls, 15-year-old William struggles to find stability after Diana's death. Charles enlists his own parents to help his son. Bubba, how would you rate this episode on a scale of 1 to 10?
Matt, I'm going to be completely backwards. I'm going to talk about the episode and my impressions of it before I give you my rating, if that's okay.
That's fine.
And that's because none of this episode felt true. This new actor playing teenage William, he looks closer to 30 years old. I swear to God, the actor's probably 30 years old and he's supposed to be playing a teen, maybe 15. Didn't ring true at all. The words of the conflict between Prince William and his father, Prince Charles, it felt like somebody just kind of pulled them out of thin air. Like, well, this is probably what these 2 people did argue about, or their thoughts, maybe a natural thought would be if you're one of these people. So it rang false. But what's funny is my ranking is I'm going to go 9 out of 10 double Fs.
Wait, double Fs?
Fantastic falsehoods.
Wow.
Even though I didn't really think any of this happened in real life. And again, the actor doesn't really look like a teen to me. Why didn't they keep the guy who was that young actor who was in episode 4 for this one? But all of that said, it was a very relatable episode in that so many of us have gone through grief. Life, the challenges of life is losing loved ones and how you react to that and the emptiness you can feel when you lose a loved one. And so for people who want kind of like honesty in like, this is what was happening with the royals, Prince William in particular during this time, I can understand how they may not like it. But for me, I actually thought it was enjoyable. It was fascinating to watch. I started really late one night after midnight. And I thought, well, I'll watch a little bit and then I'll come back and watch the rest the next day. No, I was hooked. I stayed through the whole entire episode. 9 out of 10 from me. What'd you give it?
I gave it just slightly higher than you.
Higher? Wow.
Yeah. I gave it 9.3 out of 10, what I like to call double Ps. And that doesn't stand for Packed Podcast.
Oh, wait, double Ps? If it doesn't stand for Packed Podcast, what could it stand for?
Well, it stands for perilous parenting. Because I'll tell you what, I know that even in the last episode, we talked about how I turned this podcast into my therapy couch.
Oh,
and,
yes.
Talk about things a lot as it relates to my personal life. I would give anything to be able to hug my father the same way that Will does in the end of this episode. And the extraordinary thing for me was really Philip, because of what he does out of regret for things that he wasn't capable of doing when he was younger. I've never liked Philip so much. This is the most that I've ever liked Philip. And I've been the one on this podcast who's liked Philip a lot.
Yes.
So this whole thing just was very emotional for me. I think Jonathan Pryce was the absolute star of this episode, but I don't want to, give any less credit to Dominic West and Ed McVeigh. I thought that they were just extraordinary in this episode too. Some of the feelings of hurt that I could see on Charles's face. I mean, suddenly I became Will, and I, in the end, my father and I found some peace before he went, but it didn't quite feel like enough. And I was just, regardless of how true or untrue any of this is, I think it's a beautiful story, not just about grief, but for me about parenthood and what parenthood truly is. And the fact that you got to let that kid look at you with murderous eyes, as like Philip says, and hope that he'll forgive you someday. That's just really got me. And that was the emotional side of it for me, and probably skewed my rating. But anytime I can go to a television show for therapy as opposed to paying $140 an hour to a psychologist, I'm there.
Well, wait till you see Netflix's new fee hike for the next month, but sure.
I don't know how to respond to that.
Okay. No, I'm glad you liked it more than me. This is incredible. Matt, you mentioned if you go online, people are relatively mixed on season 6, part 2. Are we out of the norm? What do you think?
I think it depends on what camp you're in. If you're talking to the same guy that was doing this podcast 2 years ago about season 3 or season 4, like we were then, I would probably like it less because of the historical inaccuracy. But
Wow.
you, Bubba,
Yes.
have convinced me
Thank
to
God.
treat this like just a dramatic story, and I really have enjoyed it a lot more. Starting the second half of last season and all of this season so far.
Matt, I'm going to go on a very short, hopefully tangent, but I got a gift from our good buddy Catfish for my birthday, the Werner Herzog biography book that he just put out. Werner Herzog, the famous director, the client from The Mandalorian. Yes. And one of the things he said was that sometimes it's better to go fake because in truth, like, hey, we interviewed this person. This is what they really said. A lot of times people don't tell the truth. They don't want to say, okay, I was hurt this much, or this is what I would really felt like. This is what I did, because people don't want to be embarrassed to say, I broke down and cried or whatever. And so sometimes you almost do get closer to the truth through fiction than through, interviewing somebody. And this is exactly what they said they did at that time. And so I've come to peace with it on The Crown. And I think even though this new actor playing Prince William, once again, to me, looks 30 years old, I think he did a great portrayal of somebody who has that empty feeling you can have when a loved one has passed. And so I appreciated this episode for what it was trying to do.
Excellent. Well, why don't we talk about season 6, episode 6, Ruritania. And this episode, I think, had an outrageous beginning, which I absolutely loved. But I wonder what you felt about this episode. How did you rate it?
So episode 6, what is it called again? How do you pronounce this title of this episode?
Ruritania, which is a name for like a kind of a fictional place in Central Europe.
Sure. All right. Well, let me jump in and say on the plus side about season 6, episode 6, it featured a spotlight on 2 actors who also appeared in our favorite miniseries ever, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, where Bernie Carvel playing the Prime Minister and the actor Jamie Parker playing Robin Janvrin. And I love seeing those guys, so that's good. On the negative side, I had seen people talking about, boy, The Crown, once a season, has to do a traditional, this is the way the monarchy operates, versus somebody being like, that is old-fashioned and pointless. We've got to modernize the monarchy. Like, we have these episodes all the time. Maybe every time there's a new prime minister, we have to have this kind of battle. And people were saying this was like the weakest one of these we've ever seen. And so I understand that thought entirely. And I understand that when you talk about the drama of a son losing his mother and these kind of things, that, you know, the stakes suddenly drop very far down. But call me crazy. Once again, I'm going to give this episode 9 triple S's out of 10.
Wait, can you do triple S's?
Yeah, well, of course, in 9 is not the right number. Normally it would be, you know, like you wouldn't sing it 9 swans a singing, you'd sing 7 swans a singing. 6 herb stewards, 5 royal barge masters, 4 rogue dragon pursuants, 3 astronomer royals, 2 multi-taver herald extraordinaries, and 1 yeoman of the glass and china pantry. Maybe it's the holiday spirit that I'm in, but I did enjoy this episode, even with what it obviously feels like lower emotional stakes and even historical stakes. I'm an American. I always say that I'm not a royal watcher. I shouldn't know any of this stuff. And somehow an episode can get me, an American who hears these ridiculous titles. You're the warden of the swans. What the hell? And then through meeting these people and seeing the passion and their, you know, how they love their positions and how they take it seriously, suddenly I'm like, okay, yeah, you can keep your job. Yeah, you can keep your job. Okay, people don't fold napkins like they used to. Okay, buddy, you can keep your job. You can keep your silly title. It worked for me. 9 out of 10. I can't believe I said it, but that's my rating. Maybe I should give up my American citizenship after that. But 9 out of 10. What about you, Matt? 9 out of 10 for me. What'd you give it?
You're not going to believe this, Bubba.
Wow, I barely can't believe myself that I'm suddenly supporting of Wardens of the Swan. So who knows? I'll believe anything, I guess.
I mean, this has never happened before.
Never happened. What?
We tied on our scores.
What?
I gave this 9 out of 10 double D's.
Wait, double D's?
Deranged Dreams. I cannot tell you how much I loved that opening sequence. That was hilarious to me. It was one of the most funny things that I've seen Peter Morgan do. And I loved it. I loved every second of it. The song that the choir was covering, I mean, it was amazing. It was perfect. I was in, no matter what the rest of the episode was going to be, I was in from that. I was just like, and Bertie Carvel just... He is amazing, too. The way that he was proceeding down the whole aisle and everything. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. But I want to save some of that for the discussion later. I think that what I did was I went back and I listened to some speeches by Tony Blair after I watched this. I cannot believe how much Bertie Carvel has, like, mastered the way that Tony Blair sounds.
Yeah, he doesn't really look too much like Blair.
No,
I love Bertie Carvel.
You close your eyes
Strange,
and you can hear Tony Blair, man.
Without question.
It was unbelievable how good that was. And all of it, you mentioned, you know, getting involved with the Warden of the Swans and the Lord Admiral of the Wash.
No, brother,
And I don't think that I've ever walked away from this episode outside of maybe the 5th episode of season 1 where the Queen was actually anointed. I think that was called Smoke and Mirrors. I don't know that I've ever felt more patriotic towards the English country, towards the UK. All of these postings made me like, they are important. By the end of that whole sequence, I was like, no, they are important. You can't let any of these people go. Don't let any of these people go. They are important. And
right. Isn't that crazy?
And Blair's speeches, that one to the Chicago Economic Board, was unbelievable. And I was just like, that there was a whole doctrine that was set after that. And we'll talk about that in the history notes. But I mean, my gosh, I wanted to become a UK citizen while I watched this episode. I'm not kidding. I loved this country in these moments. And the episode was funny. So it was great. What's more fun than seeing a bunch of people dressed up in costumes in their traditional, garbs, and they're all just sitting in a chair waiting to be interviewed by the Queen. It was perfect, man.
Matt, if you're going to, take up citizenship in the UK, I'll make you the royal pursuant podcaster. There you go.
How about
You'll have the podcaster of the wash.
How about warden of hearts on the sleeve?
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah, so we'll do that. Folks, we know that we discuss this thing quite a bit in ways that you may or may not have agreed with, but we would like to know what you agree with or what you disagree with. So please tell us. You can send posts to @LilibetPod on the site formerly known as Twitter, or you can also send them to the word double, the letters PHQ. Be sure to use that for all of the socials for Double P Media, including Facebook, facebook.com/the word double, the letters PHQ. You can send emails to me, mattsaudioblog@gmail.com, or you can leave comments on our YouTube videos. You can find the YouTube videos with Double P Media, youtube.com/the word double, the letter P, the word media. Also, don't forget, I've got a contest going on. Bubba, I've had over 8,000 views of my contest video. Over 8,000. I've never had that many views on anything that I've ever done, I don't think.
You don't deserve it, but on this you do.
Well, I mean, folks, it's true. I normally don't even deserve 100 views. But, when people hear a $100 gift card from Amazon might be available, then they tend to click. And after 8,000 views, I have not a single entry. I don't know what kind of bot got a hold of this and why it keeps getting circulated around on YouTube, but evidently, and 8,000 views isn't that much in YouTube, folks. I know. I'm not that old. I do realize that people are getting millions of views on things.
We got to TikTok this, apparently. We got to get this on TikTok to where the people are.
Oh, TikTok. Yes. At any rate, the whole idea here is that you listen to 5 things that I mispronounced. The person with the most correct guesses of what I mispronounced doesn't even have to be all 5. Just whoever guessed the most. And right now, if you only guess 1, you would have guessed the most.
Wow.
Because nobody else has guessed. So, here's your chance to win a $100 gift card from Amazon on me, so that after you spent all that money on the holidays for everybody else, you can get something for yourself. Not me. I'm getting myself out an extra $100 because this is on me personally.
Oh, wow.
But you only have until New Year's Eve to enter. You'll find the link for that video in the show notes, or you can leave a comment on any of the Double P Media YouTube videos, or you can just send an email. If you'd rather not give your guesses away to everybody else in public, you can send them to mattsaudioblog@gmail.com. MATTS audioblog@gmail.com. I want you to be a winner. I don't want to be the person giving myself a $100 gift card. And I promise you,
you've earned it. Come on, give it to yourself.
Well, it's not really giving anything if I'm the one that's also buying it.
Matt, this is the season of giving.
That's true. And I deserve it. What we want you to do, we want you to enter that contest and to tell us how you feel about part 2 of season 6. Speaking of which, I want to get this off across the bat, because folks that have been listening to this podcast have probably already noticed that there hasn't been any music. And the reason that is because during our season 4 or season 6 episode 4 podcast, we got not 1 but 2 different comments on your YouTube video that the music might not have been appropriate. Probably because I was spilling my guts out about, grief and all of this other stuff at the same time, because what we were doing was we was playing the standard beds that we always play for those particular segments. I've always believed that brand is more important than subject matter. And so if you felt that music was inappropriate, we apologize. We're going to do you a solid this time around. We're not going to play any music. It won't take really that much away from the podcast. It's just something a little extra in the background usually. But I don't want to make anybody mad. Because that's not what I do.
Right. Well, that was a special. That was a special instance. We were playing the normal music, but we were talking about the tragic death of Princess Diana. So it was odd to hear the classic music with the background of these terrible events happened, and so I think people understand with if and when our music comes back that, hey, it'd certainly be good for this 6th episode, which opens with a crazy, nightmare for the Queen dream. So hopefully people will give us that slack.
Here's your 65-second recap of Will's Mania. Harry has a drinking problem and William has a thinking problem as Charles complains to Anne and to Camilla about his difficulties with William. William himself returns to school, is counseled by his housemaster Dr. Gailey, and receives lots of wonderful letters from his classmates as well as thousands of letters from adoring teenagers. Daddy wants to go on a skiing trip with some public appearances along the way, and William, who has already suffered the onslaught from the public, doesn't like it. Charles turns to his mother and Philip for help, and Philip starts to get introspective about his own role as a father. He visits William and helps William to see where William's anger is coming from. William and Charles find middle ground in grief, and William confronts his grief by visiting his mother's grave. Also, here's your 65-second recap of Ruritania, which is written by Daniel Marc Janes and Peter Morgan, directed by Erik Richter Strand. Your synopsis is: eager to improve the monarchy's public image, the Queen seeks out savvy statesman Tony Blair, but the Prime Minister's advice defies royal protocol. Ooh. The episode begins with a bizarre nightmare of the Queen's where Tony Blair is made king. While Prime Minister Tony Blair's popularity soars due to speeches given on foreign policy, both at home and abroad, Queen Elizabeth is distraught when focus groups tell her that the monarch's popularity is decreasing, even as she gives speeches to the Women's Institute. She asks for Blair's assistance to fix her perception problem, and in typical government fashion, a committee decides what would be best for the royalty to give up, including several positions of tradition. To explore this option, the Queen and Private Secretary Fellows interview several of the positions in question and find meaning in each of them. The question of what to do is put before the family, and while Charles argues for some change, others argue against, and the Queen makes a decision that monarchy should be magnificent and special. She tells Prime Minister Blair that nothing will change and warns him about the Women's Institute, but he goes and does his own thing anyway and finds a disapproving audience. Bubba, we're at that point where we have to spin the tiny wheel of topics.
Let's do it. Let's go. Whoa, what are the odds that in this episode about fathers and sons, that's where it landed first? I guess, Matt, the tiny wheel of topics doesn't break this down, but when we talk about fathers and sons, there's certainly a focus on Charles and Williams. There's certainly a bit of a focus on Philip and Charles. There's also a grandfather and grandson, Philip and William, and maybe there's even a Charles and
Yes.
Harry. Charles and Harry. So which one do you want to touch on first?
Okay. Gee whiz. Well, I think the one that for me is kind of a twofold between Philip and everybody else. Because what I really was moved by, and there's this one look that Jonathan Pryce gives at the very end of this episode that just killed me. He's watching Charles and Will hug, and then he starts to look away, and as he looks down, his lip drops just a little bit. And I thought to myself, there's a guy who really feels terrible about the way he treated his own son. And this is a gift that he's giving Charles. He's bringing Will back to him. That was incredibly moving to me.
Matt, we can hear it in your voice. I almost don't want to follow up on it. You've mentioned at the beginning you haven't always been a fan of Philip. Philip has always kind of had little moments like this, though. So do you want to go further into what do you think is going through Philip's mind when he steps in like he does?
Yeah, well, when you see him go through those films and everything, and Charles is basically asking him and Elizabeth for help. And he starts going through all those films, and he sees the dad that showed up on film, the dad that he should have always been. And he even admits to Will, the person that he's never been, unfortunately, or have been very few times. I mean, I think he's sensing his own mortality, and he's trying to make up for past mistakes. And, I mean, what else can you ask of a father? That's...
Wow. Yeah. No, it is something that sadly you don't know if it's because of a show or because of the presentation. We don't get many moments like this. We do not get many moments like this. And Philip on the show in the most recent seasons had really been disapproving of his own son, Charles, in the way Charles's marriage fell apart and those kind of things. And so it is a nice change for this character. Let me say this, that I hear the emotion and I know how it touched you. For me, I'm still not, I don't know if I could ever get on the show's version of Philip just because of, I guess maybe I don't forget and forgive quite as much. And so I appreciated it, but there are too many moments, even when we get to the next episode 6, where Philip is just too ingrained in the way he is. And so I don't know if I'll ever truly, be on Team Philip.
Yeah. His ingrainment I have learned to forgive as the fact that he feels like he's protecting Elizabeth. He's protecting her way. And that hasn't always been the case. I mean, we can go back to season 2 and we can see
it has not always been
what a
the
jerk
case.
he was
Yes.
in season 2.
Let's go to kind of what the real focus is about. Charles and his son, William. William not only is getting the recognition, kind of the oversized outpouring of love that his mother got, he also seems much more, dare I say it, down to earth and kind of human like his mother was, and not so stiff upper lip as the way his father is, the way the show is portraying these two characters. And so it's always going to be tough because they were raised differently, that to see these two come together. So what did you like or dislike about Charles and William's, kind of being able to grieve together, I guess is the way I'd call that hug at the end?
Yeah, that's where I kind of placed it at too, is they kind of find a middle ground in grief, as sad as that sounds to say, because they don't have any other direction to go really except towards each other. For William, who at that time is still 15? I think that his processing is probably pretty damn normal.
Yes. Oh, yes. I 100%. I would be like that too. I have been like that too at times. So
yeah, and as far as Charles is concerned, you get a little taken aback by some of the things that Will confronts him with in that meeting where he thought he was meeting with Pa and Granny, and he says, because not the things about Diana specifically, but the things about I'm like her, you resent me, and those are just misinterpretations by William. But Charles even admits that it's strange for him, and there's nothing wrong with that either, because this is the woman that, this child that's standing in front of him was made with the woman that he has outshone and doesn't really like being outshone. Which, by the way, most of that stuff is, you talked about how none of it seems real. From what I gather, William not liking attention is complete hooey. It's horse hockey or whatever you want to call it. He doesn't like the intrusion, or from what I gather from accounts from Harry's spare book or whatever. No one would. Who would? Who would like that kind of intrusion? But that kind of outward hatred towards the public is not something that William really ever expressed during this time. That was drama for drama's sake. And which, what are you going to do? Just have an episode of everybody just kind of moping around? You can't, trying to process their own grief. You've got to make it dramatic. So you've got to create this kind of conflict. But that seems much more contrived to me than any, whether Will looks like he's 30 or not. To me, that's the part that seems very contrived for the sake of drama. But it was good drama, so I'm not complaining.
Do you, I mentioned Harry. Do you want to mention Harry at all in this? He's the, dare I say, just by the line of succession, he almost has the freedom to be himself and not be so micromanaged. Any thoughts on this new actor?
And what does he do with that freedom? You know what? This actor was great. I had a harder time believing that he was the same kid 6 months later than I did Will being the same kid 6 months later, because that kid in part one was tiny, and I don't think anybody shoots up quite that much or looks that much older in the face. But the drinking and everything, he's, it's very similar to the parallel with Margaret, isn't it? Being the number two, being more, the freedom to be more wild and everything, and maybe taking it just a little bit too far. I thought that was very interesting, and I loved that little disapproving look that Charles gave Will and Harry after the photographs when he realized that the two of them were drinking champagne. He could smell the alcohol, and he just kind of sneers at him a little bit. I thought that was great. That's good. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't do anything like you would think a parent would, but he just kind of looks at him like, "What are you doing?" And it almost gives off the impression of, well, you're going to ruin this for me.
Well, I think you're getting to an interesting point, and that is that, we always talk about people grieve differently. Sometimes people want to grieve alone, and then some people need other people to be with them to grieve. And if they're alone in their grief, you can have just natural dramatic conflict because once again, people do handle these things differently. And so to me, again, the specifics of this did not ring true in any way, but kind of the emotional truth underneath it is why I was so strong on this episode. And,
okay.
We're talking about fathers and sons because this is what it felt like the episode's really focus was on. But this is true of kind of almost any relationship, even non-family relationships, about how people connect and how everyone just is a unique and honest person with their own honest feelings.
Well, how did you feel, now that the wheel is spun again, about the fact that they did portray William in this way? That, he does have all the popularity of his mother naturally, and that, of course, is true. But they've put this spin on it to make him very anti that.
Well, yeah, you're right. If what I would say is, in this moment, I'm taking it more about in this moment. And admittedly, you would say, well, what about when they were like, God, do we have to take this photo by the creek of our dad in a kilt? And so I understand the issue about that. But I would say that, to me, it's believable. And in 2 episodes or 3 episodes, it's suddenly like he's grown comfortable with it. You wouldn't have to spend a lot of time for me as a viewer to understand, okay, he in these moments after his mom died, he's been very down, but now he's, up and okay. So,
yeah. And maybe part of it is even explained by his talk with Philip, in the fact that, Philip basically pinpoints, you can't be mad at your mother, so you got to be mad at everything else, and you're being mad at everything else.
Yeah.
So it could be just a grief thing. So I can't disagree with you there. And as the wheel spins again, let's talk about somebody who actually made sense, and that's Triple C.
Triple C.
Yeah, Camilla knows Charles all too well. Yeah, that's spelled with a C. C-N-O-W-S. No? Okay. So not a Triple C. Anyway, I adored Camilla in this episode, making sense about where priorities should lie for Charles. Because do see, and Dominic, again, I want to say Dominic West was absolutely fabulous in this episode.
Talk about somebody who doesn't look at anything like Prince Charles. He does give a very good performance of a character type, I guess I would say.
Gestures,
that works well.
yeah, the gestures and the mannerisms just seem like Charles to me. Even if they aren't accurate completely or whatever, and I'm not the person to say that. I'm not a judge of that or not. I'm just saying that when I see him do that thing, it doesn't matter what he looks like. The character of Charles comes across to me. And the character of Camilla is somebody who I just absolutely fell in love with this episode, because she's saying, you can talk about how it's so hard with your sons and everything, but that's your job, dude. And I loved all of that. I think that those two scenes of her on the phone with him, and her ability to keep a sense of humor and keep his spirits up. Well, you don't know anything, but I'll tell you when you know something, and I'll let you know. All of those little things, I loved all of that. How did you feel about Camilla in this episode?
One thing this show has always done in its portrayal of this character, Camilla, is they've always had her kind of a matter-of-fact realist. Like, okay, this is what it is. And it's so funny. In these earlier episodes, even in this season, Charles is always like, we need Marc Ballin to do some PR for Camilla. Camilla really needed the Crown to come out way back then, because this is the best PR she's ever gotten. Like, she's great, especially in this episode, 100%.
Absolutely. And as far as Charles goes himself, and I know we kind of already talked about it and everything, we look back at the last two seasons, season 4 and season 5, and we see him being dreadful to Diana, and how accurate a lot of that is or isn't doesn't really matter to me. As a character, he was absolutely dreadful to her.
Right.
But for the first time in this whole series, and I'm not justifying it, I'm not saying that it's the correct thing to do, but I can say that I can see why Charles was so adamant about staying with Camilla, about keeping that relationship going in some way, shape, or fashion.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
This episode demonstrates to me exactly why. And there's nothing to tell me that she hasn't been that way his whole life. So I loved that demonstration, how it kind of brings everything from the earlier seasons into focus. And again, doesn't justify it. Charles was a flat out bleep the word out here. But now I understand what the stakes were for him, I guess is what I'm saying.
As somebody who, those earlier seasons, they're so fun to enjoy for history. Like, oh, I wasn't alive at these times. Teach me about the history show. It's not just engaging drama. It's also like, oh, this makes me want to look up these things in history. Now that we've reached portions where I was alive, I really do need the characters and their emotional conflicts to pull me through. And 2 episodes into part 2, I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, there was one more on the topic, Bubba, and that was Dr. Gailey, the housemaster at Eden. I just wanted to say
that actor, he's so great on The Gilded Age on HBO now. So yeah, it's good to see him get more work. All right, let's go.
Yes, I liked him in the episode. I also, he was trying to get at the thing that Philip got to in just a few sentences, for drama's sake. But he was trying to get William to take a step back, to take a look at things.
But this is a family thing,
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing that I liked was that, when Charles and Anne were talking about, William going back to Eton, how Anne was kind of like, well, he needs his friends. He needs to toughen up. He doesn't need you, blah, blah, blah. That typical line that actually stems out of Elizabeth. Elizabeth was never a present mother, really, for Charles or Anne. If you remember back in the earlier episodes, she was always sending them off to places, especially in season 2. She was just, go to this woman's house for their son's birthday party. I'm sorry, I can't go. I know I promised I would, but now I can't go. Mm-hmm. So I love how that sense of being isolated is, I mean, I don't love it, but I mean, I love how it's exemplified that was the lesson that both Charles and Anne learned in regards to parenting. You know, that the fact that your actions do matter. And I just loved how that was demonstrated just by the difference between their attitudes and Dr. Gailey's attitude. Any other oddball things that we want to talk about for this episode now that we've gone to the therapy couch several times?
No, I want to say, why don't you get a big wheel of topics? That way we won't have trouble reading these tiny things like the one we almost forgot because so small you couldn't see it.
Well, because
we need somebody to enter this contest and win so we can get rid of all this junk and get a big wheel of topics one time.
Well, it makes a funny sound. That's why I like the wheel of topics, because it makes a funny sound. And a bigger one just sounds like Wheel of Fortune, but a smaller one sounds like a little toy spinning, and I like that.
Okay, so we know it's on there, even if it's hard to read. We know Tony Blair is going to be a big part of the discussion of this episode. You were mentioning when we were giving our mini kind of reviews of these first two episodes, you know, you're like, boy, Blair is great in his speech in Chicago. You know, this is real world. I was living in Chicago at the time that Tony Blair was giving that speech. It was right after college. So exciting to see. And he and Clinton, this is something, if you maybe were too young to realize, he and Clinton really were kind of a lot of youthful energy into heads of state that, at least here in the United States, and probably in England if you're talking about Thatcher and stuff, but here in the United States with old man Reagan and old square George W. Bush, you know, Clinton really was a breath of fresh air. And the show's presenting Tony as kind of that for the UK as well. So just fascinating to see.
I don't think that I ever really considered Tony Blair that much of a statesman.
Oh, I did. I did back then, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I did. I'm not sure that I paid much attention to him. For me, it was, you know, here's Bill Clinton. He's playing on a saxophone. That's cool. I play a saxophone. Let's go. And, you know, it was youthful and, like you said, but I don't think I ever associated that with Tony Blair myself. And to go back now,
yeah,
being a little older and a little more mature,
very much older
than I was,
yes.
You know, straight out of college and shortly after, when I was just, you know, a drunk musician for like 6 years. Now, looking at the perspective and seeing these particular speeches and the doctrine that came out of the one to the Chicago Economic Council, I really gathered a lot more. I mean, there were lots of things that Blair did later on that kind of turned his own country against him, but I really gained a new respect for who he was during the Clinton years. Like you, I wasn't much of a person who paid a whole lot of attention to our friends across the pond.
Yeah, hold on. What do you mean, like me? I wasn't a royal watcher, but I was aware of the news. I was aware of all these things. Don't say like you. Hey, I knew who Tony Blair was. I knew about all these issues that were happening.
Well, I knew who he
then.
was. You know, I knew what Serbia was. And later on, of course, the involvement with the Iraqi War and Desert Storm and all of that.
That's going to really cause him some troubles for sure.
But these were truly, like, outside of his faux pas with the Women's Institute, these were really inspirational speeches. The press conference about Serbia and the address to the Economic Council, I thought was great. He won me over.
Oh, boy. This one, just in my opinion, still looking back at history, this one we did need to step in and say, if you go and tour Europe and go to some of these places, you know, like Dubrovnik, where they filmed a lot of Game of Thrones, this beautiful city by the sea, you walk around the city walls and you can still see like shot up roofs and bullet holes. You're like, oh my goodness, this was a horrific war. I want to say that the person who really struck me was Tony Blair's wife, Cherie. Is that how you pronounce it? Cherie? She was great Not only
Yes.
was her Clinton accent great, she should be an honorary American. All the stuff she was saying, like, why are we doing this archaic ridiculousness? Oh, I thought she was perfect. Even by the end of the episode, I'm like, well, okay, let this guy who watches the Swans keep his title and keep doing his things. At the same time, every time she spoke, I was like, yeah, she's right. She's right.
You know, I love the very first episode of this season where she mockingly said, we've got a play date with the future king. That was fun. She seems like a fun. She was a fun addition to this story.
Yeah, don't blame me. I voted for Cherie. There you go.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about a couple of the subtopics, but let's talk about the Women's Institute. Never speak politics to the Women's Institute. It's the one thing that the Queen had over him all the time. That she knew better. And I loved that because the way that those women protested wasn't rude. Well, a little rude. But rude in the
getting
right.
up and leaving. I'm speaking. You're just
no. I was talking about I was talking about the slow applause. I thought that was hilarious, and that actually happened, evidently. So I'm really, and the chairperson had to tell everybody to calm down or whatever. And I don't know how many people actually left or didn't, but it was a very awkward moment for him, and I found it hilarious. I found it funny. Yeah, I just found it great. I loved it. Don't tell women that kind of stuff. Here the Queen goes in and says, it's important, all of these traditions that you've kept and all of these things done. And he comes in and he says, traditions aren't important. Let's move on. Let's modernize. Let's do this. Let's do that. And, bad selection of audience to spring that one on. His Mark Boland really Mark Boland, if you know what I mean.
Well, you've just got to know how to, he probably could have said all of those things, but in the way he said it, oh my goodness, he made some tough mistakes. His presentation skills in this particular speech, the way it's presented on the show, not good.
Dismissive and demeaning, and I love the way they stood up to it. All right, Bubba, what was your favorite moment from the dream?
Well, when anybody gets to get up in that royal garb, which, a second ago, I'm like, boy, yeah, all this is ridiculous hoo-ha. The favorite part of the dream is seeing him in that royal garb. Like, holy smokes, this is really it. How fun, how crazy. Once again, you don't use the word fun with this show too much, but what a fun way to start an episode. I really enjoyed it. What was your favorite part of the dream?
Well, I just want to say this first. When you just see Elizabeth walking down the street, I was completely taken aback. I didn't even think about it being a dream. I was just like thinking about it, her walking through memories or something like that. Until it got to the point where they started talking the sign of Tony Blair as king. And it's been 50 years since our last coronation and blah, blah, blah. I just started laughing immediately. And then it got to the ceremony itself and seeing Philip and Charles and all of them just staring at him like, what the heck? And the radio announcer saying, of course, the Queen wouldn't attend. She's destroyed, blah, blah, blah. And King Tony, that struck me. And then the kids started singing. And I lost it. I was like, that's the funniest this show has ever been. That was perfect. That was perfectly done. And after such a heavy episode that episode 5 was for me, I really needed that moment. So thank you, Peter Morgan, for doing that for me, because I really needed that moment. And everything was right with the world again. So I absolutely adored the dream.
You see that and you're like, this show's going to take me on a ride. Let's go.
Exactly. And it was a nice way to dress up the thing that was going to let you down, which was the old, an argument as old as time itself.
Yes.
How important is the monarchy? I think it's very important as we look at the last item of the wheel, as it magically came up because it's the last topic that we have to discuss. Orders and customs. So I've already given, like, how excited I was by the interviews and how pleading I was that nobody should take any of these positions away. Give me the Lord Admiral of the Wash, please.
Wasn't some guy like head of sand? Talk about a tough job. Dad, I want to go work at McDonald's. No, you're going to track the sand. That's what we do in our family. How crazy, how fun. Why am I in support of this? But I'm in support of it. It makes, I can't explain it, but I was in support of it. Let's go.
Exactly. I loved Elizabeth's conclusion, though, and that little monologue that modernity is not always the answer. Sometimes antiquity is too. And it made me think back to, remember back in season 1, that huge debate about whether Philip would kneel to the Queen or not. Or, the fact that the tent had to be put over, which they also did for King Charles when he was anointed. This is an event that is not to be broadcast. It's the mystique of it all. It's what makes them the head of the church, not just the monarch, but the head of the church. Is the mystery of that. And I'm all here for that show. That feeling of mystique and antiquity that I think for many people who are royal watchers, that's really, really important.
Well, let's go a bit further. Is it just putting a face to a name? Your reaction had to have been like mine when you hear these titles. I mean, this is comically outdated, comically ridiculous. Now, because there is a face to the name, this guy is the, royal head of sand. I don't want this poor guy to lose his job, but is it just that? Like, if we had never seen this guy, would we be willing to go, okay, sand dude, it's time to get with the times? How were they able to convince us Americans that, a guy who his specialty is folding napkins? Give me a break. How have they been able to convince us to be like, okay, I guess we need the napkin folder? 2
words for you, Bubba.
Let's hear it.
Martin Phipps. It's a thing that I'm going to be covering in the musical analysis. You don't understand how powerful that music is underneath there in psychological ways. It really worked for me. And I'm glad I was able to separate myself enough to identify why. But like I said, though, I was kind of even sold before. When you see a bunch of people dressed as insanely and wonderfully as those people were dressed, as you saw at the beginning of this YouTube, where I wear a jester hat to every podcast.
Yeah, you'd be the one. No amount of background music would convince me to keep your job. I'd make sure you were fired. That's all.
I would be fired, without doubt.
God.
My personality, my interview with the Queen would have gone very poorly. But I just absolutely, seeing all those people relegated to sitting in a line in chairs, waiting their turn.
Yes.
There was something that was so human about that it didn't matter to me what their titles were. I was ready. Okay. I was ready to root for them.
All right. I can accept that.
Folks, we've got some history notes regarding that and many other things. No music this time, I promise. So anything that seems drab
right.
or...
We do not want that music going when you're talking about the Serbian war. No, please.
No. There will be no music while I'm talking about the Serbian War this time around. Here are your history notes for Season 6, Episode 5, Willsmania. The princes did, in fact, visit Whistler for skiing the week of April 3rd, 1998. That, according to Peak News Magazine. Also, according to Variety.com, Prince William really was mobbed by girls during their work/vacation to Canada, just like in the show. Another supplement for episode 5, the gravesite shown that Will visits is close to the way it would have looked back at the time in 1998. Sources, The Mirror and the U.S. Sun. And as a supplementary, there is a tour of the gravesite area though not the grave itself, that can be found on YouTube. You will find all of those links in the show notes. For episode 6, regarding the Serbia situation, in March of 1999, Blair addressed both Parliament and the country as airstrikes began. You can watch his address to Parliament courtesy of C-SPAN. On April 22, 1999, Blair addressed the Economic Club of Chicago. That address later became known by the media as the Blair Doctrine, or also known as the Doctrine of the International Community. Source: the Chicago Tribune. In other events, Private Secretary Robert Fellows actually resigned as Private Secretary in 1999, not following the U.S. presidential election in 2000. In 1977, Fellows was recruited to join the royal household as Assistant Private Secretary. He spent the next 20 years in the Private Secretary's office, becoming Deputy in 1986 and Private Secretary in 1990. Fellows held the position for 9 years. Source: thesun.com. In June of 2000, Tony Blair did get heckled by a 10,000-strong gathering of the Women's Institute. The heckling began when Blair started to list examples of government action to extend opportunity, and was followed by slow clapping when he started talking about NHS reform. His response was reportedly tut-tutted, with audience members saying it was a party lecture and not a debate. Source: the Radio Times. On December 9th of 2000, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the stay of the recount of the state of Florida, according to Wikipedia and History.com. The question Variety.com asks is there such a thing as the yeoman of the glass and china pantry and a warden of the swans? And the answer is yes. The yeoman of the glass and china pantry is responsible for everything from unpacking glasses to folding 170 monogrammed napkins into the Dutch bonnets before a state banquet at Buckingham Palace. The warden of the swans is in charge of what's called swan-upping, which means the annual swan census. By law, the monarch owns all of the mute swans in Britain. Finally, The Independent tells us that the royal family are reported to have used focus groups over the years, although it is not known if the Queen directly requested any focus groups herself. Again, that source, theindependent.co.uk. You'll find all of these links in the show notes. Time to play our silly games. This is where we do get to be silly about serious subjects.
Yes, please.
And this game is, in fact, called What's Worse? First question that we have to ask ourselves is, who wants to ask the first question? And then the person who asks that question gets to pick and tells the other person to answer it. And whichever way they answer this twofold question,
yes,
the person who asked the question must argue the opposite side. So the first thing we have to determine, Bubba, is will you ask the first question or will you make me?
You do it. Come on. It's your show. Let's go.
Here we go, Bubba. This is tough.
Let's hear it.
When you're younger,
yes,
whiskey or beer, what's worse?
Oh, my God. They're both terrible when you're a kid. Boy, how old is Harry supposed to be at this point?
He's like 13 or something at that age.
Oh, my God. What happened to this kid that he can enjoy either? I would say that somehow, some way, whiskey is actually worse. But when I was that age, all alcohol was like, you got to be kidding me. Yuck.
Bubba, that's an excellent point. You get anything else there?
Sorry, no. So my official vote is whiskey, and it's not even close. Just because beer, there are other flavors in it that can kind of distract you. Kind of the weedy flavor can maybe distract you from the terrible taste. Where whiskey, it is just straight up yuck.
Okay. I enjoy your argument. You're completely wrong, and here's why.
What?
I hate wheat. Anything wheat. I don't like being healthy. I don't like eating wheat bread. All my life, because been a diabetic, I've had to eat wheat bread. I've had to eat all of these wonderfully healthy things in order to keep my blood sugar from being 700. Guess what beer tastes like? It tastes like liquid wheat. It's awful.
Okay.
You know, whiskey, at least the alcohol is so strong that you lose the wheat taste. You taste more of the barrel. You taste more of that. When you're drinking Bud Light, what do you taste? Water and wheat. It's awful.
Okay, Kid Rock, sure.
I'm not going to shoot him up. I'm not going to pull out a machine gun and shoot him. But
Right.
I am going to tell you that, you know, if you're 13, don't drink.
All right. Way to take a big stand. If you're 13, don't drink. Boy, yeah, I'm not sure anyone's
That's
willing
more
to go
than
out
Charles
on that
did.
ledge with you.
That's more than Charles did. All he did was sneer at him and turn his back.
The kids are mourning. Let him mourn. One time. Come on.
One time. More like every time those two are together, they're drinking. All right, Bubba, what's the other question?
Okay, so now let's get to something really. You ready?
All right.
All right. What is worse? Relying on your brother's aim to get something into your mouth. So this is Harry trying to get something into your brother's mouth. Or you're so old and senile, you need an old movie projector to help you remember things. Like, oh, I should be a good father. What's worse?
Have you tried to pull out an old 8mm film and play one?
I did a lot a couple of years ago. Yeah, that stuff is not easy to deal with, for sure.
I mean, that stuff, you got to be real careful how you handle it. It can break down just the acid from your fingers.
Of course.
You know, as somebody who recently went to school for a master's in library science, use gloves, people. Whenever you're handling old film, please use gloves.
Sure.
Also, the machinery will break down on you. The film quality, no matter how careful you've been with the film, is still going to be grainy. There's a reason why on all of these video programs now they have that old film type effect that you can put on things. It's because that's the way film really is after it's been sitting in a can for a long time.
Oh, yeah. So
why do you think they have been so? The National Archives has been so strong to try and digitize all of these films. Think of, there's Bubba, some of our favorite films, some of our Star Wars films are dying in a can, no matter how cold those are being kept in a refrigerator.
Ice cold, yeah.
It's awful. Don't mess with old film, folks. That's worse.
Okay, so Matt went with it's worse to, pull out these old films. Of course, you used good films. You didn't mention, don't you think it's bad that the Leprechaun series is dying in a film cam somewhere? Because no one would say, no, thank God it's dying. Maybe you won't have to watch that Drek anymore. What's worse is stuff going in your mouth that's been in your brother's hands. Now, boys, especially teenage boys, hygiene is not number one, number two, number three, number 452 on the list of things they care about. So if it's in my brother's hand and he's going to try to get it into my mouth, yuck, gross. I'd rather have old celluloid in my mouth. I know where it's been. So what's worse? Harry's hands. There you go. I win.
Folks, we'll put it on a poll to determine who actually wins.
What?
You can find those polls at Lilibet Pod on the site formerly known as Twitter. Be sure to reach out to us. You can also reach out to @PHQ on all of the social medias and let us know what you're thinking about part 2 of season 6. We've got a lot of feedback coming up regarding part 1, which we really adore you for submitting. It's been wonderful to get all of that. But we want to hear more. Because, would you rather sit and listen to us talk for, God knows how long?
Please, no.
Spewing especially me, spewing my thoughts when you can actually hear us just read somebody else's great thoughts? I mean, that's what I'd rather do. So be one of those people who submits great thoughts so that I don't have to listen to Bubba's opinions anymore.
Please.
Season 6, Episode 6, What's Worse? Bubba, are you going to ask or me?
You always start, man. This is you get the choice to lose. Do you want to lose with the first question or the second?
All right. This is going to be fun. I'm going to ask you the question, and I am going to ask, this is right up your alley, Bubba. What's worse, being born into the position of yeoman of the glass and china pantries?
Mm-hmm.
Or being born into the position of the Lord High Admiral of the Wash?
Okay, so this one I'm gonna touch on both, so I'm gonna kind of destroy your argument ahead of time, Matt. So I apologize, but talk about the two positions: the yeoman of the glass and china pantry. This dude is obsessed with folding napkins. That is pretty bad. Now let's talk about the Lord High Admiral of the Wash. Now I'm pretty sure I'm gonna slightly confuse him with the dude who dealt with sand. But isn't it like, well, this is what the tidal basin looks like at this time? So you would rather be born into that guy, because who's gonna challenge you? You're telling me this wash has moved over here a bit, and now the sand collects more here than it does there? Nobody's, you can goof off. Nobody's gonna come in and say, hey, the wash moved slightly. You've got it wrong on your documents. Nobody's gonna care. But if you don't get that napkin folded right, hell, off with your head. So it is much worse being born into the position of yeoman of the glass and china pantry. It's just facts.
You're absolutely wrong, and here's why.
Wrong.
Yes, because when you are the yeoman of the glass and the china pantry,
mm-hmm.
you're using napkins to make sure that everything's polished. You're using napkins to protect whatever's breaking, and you're folding them, which people are using. Who has to wash all of that? The Admiral of the Wash.
Oh, wait,
the Admiral of the Wash is in charge
clothes?
of all of the linens.
I got to wash these napkins? Wait, what?
So I think it is much worse to be the Admiral of the Watch, because I don't have enough tide for that. I just don't.
Wow. Well, now I feel terrible. So wait a minute. You're telling me as the wash is meaning like the washing machine? I got to wash stuff. It's not like the wash of the sand. Okay, so I got that completely wrong. I would still rather listen to me. Have you ever used?
Well, maybe I got it completely wrong, but that's my argument.
You're right. You're right.
It.
Have you ever used Tide? That stuff cleans everything. I don't have to do any work. No matter what type of wash
I don't have
doing.
enough Tide, Bubba. I don't have enough.
You do. Listen, the queen, the Tide, the Admiral of the Tides is going to come help me clean this wash. That's what it's going to be.
Okay. With that being said, it's time for musical analysis. Folks, I know not all of you are into the music thing. It's the one thing that I do that's kind of unique to everybody else.
Totally unique.
But, well, not totally. There are great podcasts out there that analyze all kinds of great music.
They suck. You were the best.
Well, I am the best.
Hell yeah.
But if you don't think that I'm at the best at it, you can skip ahead 11 minutes and you'll be done with it. So as we begin this musical analysis, let's look at the songs that are under the purview of music supervision. That's the tunes that Phipps doesn't compose. And in episode 5 of season 6, we have My Favorite Game by the Cardigans, As Will Wakes Up. We also have Scylla of Glaucus. Boy, I probably mispronounced that, but it's Jean-Marie Leclerc. That's the opera-type song that's being played on the radio. We then have Charles switching it to another station where we hear Torn by Natalie Imbruglia. And the next piece probably is performed in secular music often. However, I did not know it. The one being performed by the choir, as well as sitting there at Eton. I could not figure out what that tune was. So if you know, please, once again, let me know at LilibetPod on the site formerly known as Twitter, or you can send emails to mattsaudioblog@gmail.com. And that takes care of the music supervision for that episode. Now, there's a couple of things, and you heard me in my prior musical analysis episode over part 1, where I was confused a little bit about the continuity of certain themes being used in certain situations. I speculated in that podcast that it's probably likely because of the director's influence or how the piece makes you feel. This time around, I've found similar incontinuities. However, I think I might be focusing more now on the fact that thematically what these tunes represent is being stretched across various situations. For instance, in episode 5, you have a lot of portrayal of the theme Aberfan from the season 3 official soundtrack. And that makes sense because Will is dealing with the tragedy of the loss of his mother. Another theme that represents tragedy when you consider where it was first introduced in the episode Empathy of House. I believe that was season 5, and I think it was in the season 5 official soundtrack. That was also used for a scene with Will in this particular episode. Again, thematically, it represents tragedy. Regardless of who that tragedy is pinned to when it first is employed by the television show, you can then take that feeling of tragedy or that theme of tragedy and you can apply those themes to multiple situations. Moving on to episode 6, let's look at the music supervision first. There's a version of Dreams, Things Can Only Get Better. That was during the Queen's dream at King Tony's coronation. Oh my gosh, that was hilarious. I loved that version. Wonderful arrangement, too. But the rights to do that performance, of course, had to be directed through the music supervision. And then I'm not sure who did the arrangement. It might have been Phipps. It might have been somebody else. But the boys' choir singing that song was absolutely amazing. And I loved the orchestral arrangement behind it. It was perfect. Again, that song, Dream, or Dream, I think is actually how most people say it, but it's like D-Ream. Things Can Only Get Better. Then as the Queen wakes up, she, of course, has to struggle and find the radio just to make sure that she's still who she is. And she hears a version of God Save the Queen. That, of course, composed by Henry Carey. I think the late 17th century probably is when that was composed. And another piece for the Women's Institute is entitled Jerusalem. That's the song that they sing both when the Queen visits and when Tony Blair visits later. It has that lyric in there, and sometimes it's even referred to this song, and did those feet in ancient time. Sir Hubert Parry composed that piece, and 2 wonderful performances of that. So let's now talk about some other incontinuities that have actually worked out to be very much in the favor in the broader scheme of themes that the music theme can be applied to. In season 4, there was a cut entitled Fred and Gladys in the official soundtrack, and that referred to Charles and Camilla. That was their nicknames, right? What that theme overall represented was the fact that Charles and Camilla were together was causing a huge problem for the Queen. And in the same sense, from this particular episode, we see that Tony Blair is, in a way, in his own way, creating a huge problem for the Queen. As his popularity is going up, her popularity is going down. And so the overall theme of a problem for the Queen is already represented in the music, regardless of what the title is. And throughout the course of the episode, you will hear, like during Blair's speech about Serbia, in other instances where we see Tony Blair, you hear that theme being played. Again, go back to the season 4 official soundtrack. If you want to hear that, look for Fred and Gladys, and you'll hear that same musical theme, just representing the broader philosophical theme of Trouble for the Queen. And the final thing that I want to talk about in this musical analysis is a new piece, and this one is from the season 6 official soundtrack. It's entitled Orders and Customs. Once again, go out and buy this official soundtrack. Don't just stream it, buy it. He deserves his money. But this particular piece I loved because, to me, it added an extra depth to the traditions of what was being done. This is when Elizabeth and Robert Fellows are interviewing all of these positions to see what they do. and this wonderful piece plays underneath as they do it, that really adds a depth, showing you how deeply important and deeply embedded these traditions are. As you know, when I analyze music, I like to talk about the timbre, what instruments are being played, the melodic shape, how high or how low does it go and in which directions, and how big the jumps are, the rhythm, and the harmony. We're going to address a few of those with this. First of all, the timbre is mostly the French horn, which is a very popular instrument for Phipps. He tends to use the French horn for everything, and it has kind of a representation of the Queen herself or the royal nature of things, which we often associate brass with royalty. But as the piece goes on, you also are introduced to the very strong timbres of strings, which also have a sense of royalty to them. But what the difference between strings and brass are is while brass pronounces, strings feel. And that's what helps add the deeper feeling to it as the piece progresses. Let's talk about the melodic shape. The melodic shape I love because it has big jumps in between certain points. There are small jumps and then big jumps, and most of those jumps are downward. And what that does is it gives the feeling of depth. Oh, this is much bigger than we thought. It's kind of like looking at an iceberg. When you're looking at an iceberg from sea level, you see what's from sea level and above. What you don't realize is in order for that little bit to be above, you've got to have a whole lot more underneath. And this dipping down of the melody and the way that the melody continues to travel down in some ways by its shape creates that effect. This tradition is much bigger than being just a waste of money. First, the melody starts out with this. And I love that. It's got that little skip in there at first, and then it dips way down to tell you this is a big thing. And then it comes back up just slightly, and it resolves on the fifth note of tonality. It feels like it needs to move on to the root. It's not necessarily tense as a melody, though. Instead, it's a stabilizing factor. The fact that this tradition is stable and that it holds everything else up, because everything needs to lead back to the one, and this is what's underneath. This is the foundation that's underneath. Now, the second part of the melody dips even lower. That sounds like this. And then there is a third part, and this is where harmony comes into play. And this adds extra depth to everything. That sounds like this. And that final resolution that you heard there tells us that everything is as it should be. It ends in tonality. It's telling us we are home. This is what is meant to be. I won't say it's Phipps's greatest work, but it's certainly the addition of this music helped me really examine what was going on with these different types of traditions, helped me really feel for how important each of these positions are to each of these people, and how it ultimately becomes important to the Queen. And that's musical analysis. Back to our discussion. Time for some feedback, Bubba. Oh, boy,
Wonderful.
We've got a lot of feedback.
Thank goodness.
I once again just want to shout out to The Matrix for leaving a review, which was over a year ago, and I don't know if I read it or not, and I'm not going to read it out loud here. But on Apple Podcasts, they left a review praising the podcast, and I really appreciate that. Folks, if you want to leave a written review or even just stars, please do so through your podcast app. It really helps the podcast be more noticeable. And, I realize we're running out of episodes, and thus we're running out of episodes of podcasts. But it never hurts. It never hurts to just let us know how you feel about the podcast. Maybe the next time we do a podcast, the next time I drag Bubba across the lawn and make him do another one with me, we'll be better at it because of your great feedback. That's all that I ask. So thank you for leaving written reviews and letting us know what we got right, letting us know what we got wrong, leaving stars appropriately to match whatever those comments are.
Please.
We also got audio feedback. Bubba.
Wonderful. I hope it's from somebody really, really bright and smart.
It turns out that it is. It's from a double L.
Double L?
Yeah, loyal listener.
Oh.
Which is a phrase that I've not used too often in this podcast. But Bill Cava has been listening to me since my Lost days of podcasting. He listened to Keys to Lost. He used to submit my very first 3-word segment. He would submit 3 words for those. And so 15 years I've known Bill Cava.
Great guy.
Absolutely. Bubba.
Yeah.
He came to the Keys. He came to Key West to hear the band that I was playing one time. I think he just happened to be there, but he also stopped in and said hi and listened for a second.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah. So, Bill, I love you, man. I miss you. He came to St. Louis one time for a Lost reunion. It was wonderful to see Bill there and later on in life down in Key West. So let's hear what Bill has to say.
Hey, Matt, how's it going? It's Bill Cava. Just wanted to check in and talk about A Little Crown, Season 6, Episodes 1 through 4. Found them amazing. I mean, I love the show as a whole. I mean, from Season 1 on, it's a beautiful show to watch, to listen to. The acting, the portrayals of these characters. I mean, even now to see Dominic West, watching him in The Wire as McNulty and then now as Prince Charles, and he pulls it off. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I'm in awe about like how someone can pull that off and be so believable.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the episode 4 scenario with the ghosts of Christmas guilt, that I'd like to call them. I know Charles tries to sugarcoat it by calling it regret, but definitely hard up guilt on that. It's kind of funny how he tries to justify it too by, thinking that when the ghost of Diana says, proud of the way you stood up at the hospital and you were racked, with pain and kind of like you did the right thing and about the handsome part. So he was kind of like, he had guilt, but he was trying to make himself feel better. It was pretty obvious to that point, and it's kind of his personality. Granted, I did watch this episode with a huge lump in my throat throughout, so. And he also says that you were always the most beloved of all of us. So again, trying to make himself feel better by, not blaming himself for anything that's gone on. And now on to Al-Fayed Mohammed. I mean, this is the most complicated one, only for the fact that, I mean, he wanted in on the British royalty for the longest time, all the way back to when he was young in Egypt, when he first laid his eyes on the Duke of Windsor, and was like, that's what I want. I want to be like that. It started off by hiring the valet, Duke of Windsor's valet, to teach him how to be, how the British act. And again, it went on to buying the Ritz, and then, looking for acceptance there. And then at the Polo Club, he ended up getting Harrods, again, to just get that audience with the Queen. It was a big deal. Every step was calculated. And then he, I believe, it was depicted here, but, they said it was fiction, but he commissioned Mario to get that shot. I mean, there's no other explanation of why he was in the middle of the Mediterranean and came upon them to be able to take that picture. And once that picture was taken and once that bounty was paid, all the money, that started the frenzy, the paparazzi frenzy. Granted, there were always paparazzi, but I mean, now it was monetized to a point where it just created this frenzy and it just built and built and built. And here we see him facing, his ghost, his guilt, realizing that he lost his son over his obsession with being part of the West. And I think the ghost of Dodi himself tells him that, it's just not necessary. You don't need it. But he is obviously the most out of the three of them, and getting to the Queen next, that are racked with the guilt. I mean, I think he realizes he started the chain of events with that photograph commission that led to his son's death, which is an awful thing for a parent to go through. Now, the Queen, I misspoke earlier. This is actually the most complicated aspect of the guilt. The Queen knows, I think the Queen knows that she draws a hard line as far as how the monarchy should act goes. I mean, she has been trained her whole life since she was a teenager on how to go. I mean, Winston Churchill trained her in ways, the ways that the monarchy should act. I mean, we saw it when she thought she didn't have to live in Buckingham Palace, but what happened? Churchill said, no, this is what you have to do. So she's always driven the hard line. This is the way it is. And even Prince Philip, he's the same way. This is what it is. But I think when it comes to Diana, there are definitely cracks where she can see that, yeah, Diana's right, but still I can't give an inch, because that just will open the floodgates and the monarchy will never be the same. And during this conversation, well, in her head with Diana, she does resolve to address the public and address the death. Now, I remember watching this live as a young man, a younger man, and I thought it was legitimate, but I think in this production, it kind of was a hostage video, it seemed a little bit. Like the heart wasn't totally into it, but she did it anyway. I think as we see in the following years that Harry is going to carry that torch and torment them even more as far as opening up the monarchy and making that crack a huge chasm. And we can see as the episode and the first half of this season closes out, as the Queen is saying her nightly prayers, which I'm sure she says something to Diana, but that fear will remain with her the rest of her life about the monarchy. And you could see the fear because she feels that lurking aura of Diana still, and it startles her to the point where she's frightened, and she can see the future is going to be rough. Now, I have to admit, I'm not into the William and Harry years as much. I mean, this was my wheelhouse, the 80s and 90s. But I'll watch still because, the show's been amazing. So I'll still watch. I'm sure it'll be just as entertaining as it has been from the get-go. So with that, I will leave you. I hope my words have not been too choppy as I was trying to gather my thoughts. But I appreciate you guys. You did an amazing job. And I will be listening. Take care. Bye.
Incredible. Good to hear from Bill. Good to hear people appreciate this show. Now, this is dealing with, almost like still an open wound. Some of this, the pain of Diana's tragic end. And I think everybody's reacting to it differently. But I think Bill, to be honest, Bill's got to come on here on one of these episodes. Brilliant thoughts. I loved it.
I loved it too. And if it's one thing, Bill, after 15 years, what I've come to learn is that you're a better podcaster than me. So why don't you come on to this show with us when we review the finale? Let me know. Reach out to me, Bill. You know how to reach out to me, and see if you can come on and let us know how you thought about the end of this series, the series finale. I want you on here. I also really loved your thoughts about the ghosts because in a short 6 minutes, you managed to say what took me 2 hours to never really get to.
No, you didn't. Run your ideas by Bill first, Matt.
I'm running my ideas right now by Bill and saying, Bill, come on to the show. Mm-hmm. And then I'll just sit back and produce, and you and Bubba can host it. Great thoughts, Bill. I really appreciate you taking the time to put that together for us and send it in. Folks, you can send me stuff as well. What Bill did was he just made an MP3 and he sent it to me via email. mattsaudioblog@gmail.com, MATTS audioblog@gmail.com. Bubba, we also got some feedback from Facebook. This is the first Facebook feedback we've had in quite a while for this podcast. So why don't you let us know what Gina said?
Yeah, well, speaking, Bill doing great podcasting. Gina, if you listen to the Daily DVR podcast, she does some great work there as well. Gina gave us this feedback on Facebook where she wrote, I'm finally caught up on The Crown, meaning, part 1 of season 6. And she says, I read The Spare at the beginning of the year. And because of that, I found the first 4 episodes of this season hard to watch. Last season, season 5, I felt it was the show's best season. Not sure if you've read the book, This Bear, but it was insightful into the firsthand experience of the royals, at least Harry, and in some instances, William's experiences. And it was so hard to have them to have to deal with the paparazzi. The previews for the rest of this season, though, season 6, is making me cringe. We'll see. So that's Gina on Facebook. Matt, I think when people talk about why this season is going to get mixed, I mean, this at times, even though, we're talking about 2 decades ago, at times, if you're of a certain age, it feels like this just happened. And so it is odd in that sense to watch it like that.
I agree. And I've loved interacting with Gina, like on Podcast Winterfell with Axel and her, and her thoughts are always smart and brilliant. And I hope that you end up being wrong about this part 2. And lovingly so, I say that, Gina, because I want everybody to enjoy this show as a drama. But I do totally understand, because for a long time for me, as somebody who was just interested in the history and everything and got really into the history and everything, I would get mad when they would get things out of order. I think they even got a couple things out of order in this particular
in episode 6. They really did. Yeah.
For instance, Fellows resigned long before the election, and things like that. But Bubba has convinced me. Just look at it like a drama and see if that works for you that way. And it has for me. So I hope, Gina, that it works for you as well. As you said, we'll see. We got some feedback on the YouTube channel as well. That's youtube.com/@the word P, media. Please do check out that channel. We want you to like our videos.
Yes.
Or just do something to trigger the algorithm gods. That's all that we ask. Just wake the algorithm gods up so that Bubba can get 7,000 more views on his A Murder at the End of the World videos.
Let's go.
And we love getting your feedback on these, and we try to share all of it. This is for our season 6 episodes 2 and 3 review. ZephyrCat7 said, "I'm not even watching the show.
What?
But I love your podcast so much. With your recaps, games, and analysis, it feels like I've seen the episode. You guys are awesome. A triple P. Perfectly polished podcast." Are you sure that you're watching our videos?
No, well, our videos are longer than the episodes, so it really is like they're watching them. So that's good.
I'm sure to them it feels like they're watching a whole season at a time when they watch a single episode that I put out.
I mean, please.
A podcast episode. But thank you so much, ZephyrCat7. That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me. Okay, maybe not, but it's real close. Real close. Thank you so much for watching, and we love you, ZephyrCat7. Marisha's Mid said this about our review of season 6, episode 2 and episode 3.
I liked these episodes of part 1, but I do think The Crown did a 180 with the story, right? The show made the royal family out to be much more sympathetic, and they humanized the royal family, but they made Dodi Fayed's father, Mumu, to be a not so great guy who wanted to be part of the royal family and was willing to do whatever he needed to do, and he pressured his son Dodi. I didn't really like the ghost scenes. It was very weak and would have liked it more if they had showed them having guilt in a different way. The show played this season much more on the fiction side than the show normally does, because it felt like that for the biggest part told, the more historical storylines that the show has done, they've kind of let that slide. Does it feel like a left turn to you? It does to me. It feels so sudden, and I'm asking myself, is this how they always intended the story to be? Or did they need to switch because Harry and Meghan made a deal with Netflix, and so we have to keep everybody in the royal family happy? Only the future and the final part of The Crown will reveal the truth. Oh, incredible. I understand people feeling like the show did a 180. I've mentioned in the review of part 1 that leaving the Queen's perspective so much felt like a real strange shift in the show. And then here in the first episode of part 2, is so much on William. Once again, it's not on Queen Elizabeth. So that is a shift. I've been able to enjoy it, but I certainly understand feedback like this.
Yeah, I do too. And everybody's gotten their perspective on what these events in real life mean to them and how that relates to the show.
Yeah.
We also got, as we mentioned before, some comments regarding the music on our season 6 episode 4 review. I've already addressed those, and you guys are musicless because I want to be safe and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
Of course.
But one of the people who contributed some of that and actually was very helpful in pointing out specific time marks that helped me identify where the music might have been inappropriate was the Chuckle Show. And they also responded to us regarding this season of The Crown. And they said that this season is better than the previous season. It's amazing.
Oh, wow.
That was a question that you asked, Bubba, I think, to the YouTube audience, just in one of the little comments on that post. And thank you very much, The Chuckle Show, for letting us know how you feel about the season as well.
Heck yeah. And
Bubba, it's time to answer to the people who listen to us, who vote on these polls. Finally. I mean, we did a what's worse question on season 6, episode 3. And that question was, what's worse, being chased all over town just because you wanted ice cream, or being a jewelry shop owner who has to clean up all of the finger and palm prints off of the glass from the people chasing the people who just wanted ice cream? Bubba, this has never happened before.
No, you keep saying that.
Except when it has.
Thank you. Okay, truth. One time.
This ended in a tie. 50%, straight down the middle. Who knows how many thousands of votes on the site formerly known as Twitter. But 50% each said being chased and cleaning windows are equally as bad.
Wow. So half those people have to be royal historian of the Windex, and the other half will be, our order of chaser.
Yes. One is one side subscribes to the Admiral of Ice Cream, and the other side to the Admiral of Window Cleanings. Now, we did ask 2 questions for episode 2 of The Crown. The first question being, what's worse, being Mario Brenner and taking those photos of Diana and Dodie, or being Duncan Muir and having to take photos of a prince wearing a kilt from a lower angle?
Right.
Oh, but you whooped me on this one. You argued that being Duncan Muir, well, you whooped me almost every time, except
every time
when things that never happened before happen.
Yeah.
And we tie. But otherwise, I think your record's pretty good. You're like 7, 0, and 1 or 2. And so Duncan Muir, 83.3% to my measly 16.7% for Mario. And the final what's worse question was, what's worse, hiring paparazzi to take pictures of your son,
right,
or having Marc Bolan as your PR consultant?
Oh boy, if Marc Bolan won this, if he won this, you've got your thumb on the scale. Give me a break,
Bubba. This has never happened before.
Oh, gee,
I won. Marc Bolan.
Oh my, thumb on the scale.
Nearly 2 out of every 3 voters.
Cheating.
There may have only been 3 voters, but I was
electors.
2 of them, and I voted for Marc Bolan. So that's the way that goes. 2-1. I win that margin. There was a question also for season 6, episode 4, and that question was, what's worse, being in the rain for 14 hours or listening to Paranoid Android? Bubba, you picked Paranoid Android. I believe I won again. Overwhelmingly,
no,
83.3% said that being in the rain for 14 hours is worse. And we had a parliamentary debate. See, this is where I get confused. Because if Marc Bolan is worse, then how could it possibly be that you won the parliamentary debate saying that he's good for Charles? Is he good for Charles because he's worse? Is that what people want? Do they want Charles to be hung out to dry by Marc Bolan? the same way that you claim that he does him good.
Right.
I said he was too sing-songy. That only got 12.5%.
Thank God.
Saint-Tropez is called. And that's evidently good for Charles. I don't know what sing-songiness does for Charles, but it does something for him. Guess what, Bubba? I put out a poll just this morning as we record this, which is the day after the new season episodes were released, and I asked,
what brilliant timing!
Yeah, we did. These votes are early. The responses are early, so the poll will still be open for a few more days. If you're just hearing this podcast now, go and check at Lilibet Pod on the site formerly known as Twitter and look for these polls. If you can still vote on them, we would love to get your votes on these. But we ask people to use those same 4 metrics that we've been using: great, good, fair, or not so good, in order to rate these episodes. Season 6, episode 5 did not get a whole lot of responses as compared to season 6, episode 6, probably because Bubba retweeted that one, I believe, at the word double the letters PHQ, where you can also find the polls sometimes retweeted. But for episode 5, the split was fair or great. 71% thought it was great, but a healthy percentage, 28.6%, thought that it was just fair. But we haven't gotten any votes on the other categories. So please, folks, if you're listening and you can get to the Twitter polls, the site formerly known as Twitter polls,
get it right.
You vote. I know. Season 6, episode 6, the ratings are far more split across things. Most of the ratings are 42.9% and 23.8% as great or good. But again, a healthy 35% rated it fair or not so good. 19% at fair, 14.3% at not so good. Wow. As we said at the very beginning of this episode, people are split about part 2.
Yes.
So this is interesting. We're going to have to keep track of this as we go along and continue our coverage of The Crown as it comes to its close, and this podcast will also come to its close. But in the meantime, we definitely want to hear from you at Lilibet Pod on the site formerly known as Twitter, or at the word double the letters PHQ. That's P for podcast, HQ for headquarters. Also use that same spelling for Facebook, facebook.com/the word double the letters PHQ. You can send emails to me, mattsaudioblog@gmail.com. Hey, record yourself an MP3, attach it. We will play it just like we did Bill Cava's. Or you can leave comments on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/at the word double the letter P, the word media. Bubba, what's actually happening on that YouTube channel? You're still covering A Murder at the End of the World? Aren't we coming up on a big finale here pretty soon?
No, we're not covering it anymore because this podcast went so long. The show ended weeks ago. Yes, we're wrapping up our coverage. When you hear this, the coverage will be wrapping up on this new Hulu, FX, Disney Plus, Hotstar, Star Plus show called A Murder at the End of the World. If you like murder mysteries, always check us out at Double PHQ on social media.
You got anything in mind for 2024?
Rest.
Yes, me too. At least until House of the Dragon comes out, right, in the summer. And then, of course, the Joffrey podcast will be back. And you'll want to subscribe to the YouTube channel. You want to like the YouTube channel. You want to get notifications for the YouTube channel so that you can be sure to catch Bubba and Catfish back at their glorious best. Listen to the Joffrey podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and check it out on the YouTube. Bubba, thanks for being with me on this extraordinarily long episode, which will probably be split into 2 episodes.
Don't do it. Come on, release it all as one. Let's go.
Release it all as one, just so it's only one 20 gigabyte video that you have to upload on the Double P Media YouTube, as opposed to 2 10 megabyte or 10 gigabyte videos, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, folks, you got a long one. We realize that you're not even here. You weren't here an hour ago. But thank you so much for checking us out. He's Bubba. I'm Matt. He's Saint-Tropez. I'm Scotland. Bye.